So this will be a short lecture because we've already talked about prions a couple times. We talked about prions in chapter 1 when we talked about emerging infectious diseases and mad cow disease, and we talked about prions in the microbial control chapter, controlling microbial growth chapter, when we talked about the hard to kill microbes. So this will be a brief review. So PRPC, this stands for prion protein. Prion proteins are normal animal proteins. They've been implicated in formation of memory, but they're still very poorly understood. All we know is that they're important in nerve function. We don't know exactly what they do, but we know that they're important in nerve function, and we've figured out that they play a role at least in memory, but they probably have other roles as well. Now, because of a DNA mutation, a prion protein could be mistranscribed and mistranslated into a disease-causing prion. So when you hear prion protein, that's what the PRPC stands for. We're talking about a normal functioning nervous system protein. When we just say prion without the protein at the end, just prion by itself, and that's what the PRPSC stands for, that's a disease-causing prion. Okay. And that can happen because of a mutation, but that's exceedingly rare. I mean, you know that mutations are pretty rare as it is, but having this specific exact mutation, that almost never happens, right? That's very, very rare. So spontaneously developing a mutation that changes prions into prion proteins, that is exceedingly rare. Almost never happens. Much more often you get a prion disease by contact with another prion disease. So like in the case of mad cow disease, and there aren't that many examples of prion diseases out there, but so mad cow disease is the famous one, and you know that you had to eat raw meat in order to pick it up. And actually it's not just raw meat, there's high risk meats, so where you have a lot of nervous tissue, because prions are proteins that you find in the nervous system. So remember, mutations happen to the DNA. So there, of course, what caused mad cow disease in the first place is there was a cow who had a mutation to the gene that coded for prion proteins. And so that cow started making prions, disease-causing prions, instead of prion proteins. Now, you wouldn't walk around worried about that happening to you because it's like winning the lottery or something. It's just not, I mean, it's the the awful lottery. It's just not something that you expect to actually happen. So, but there was one cow that happened to, and then the reason that spread, because the cows just can't spread it to each other by being around each other. They have to eat each other. They have to eat each other's brains or other tissue with a lot of nerves in them. So like there's high-risk meats where there's viscera that are highly innervated with a lot of nervous tissue, so those would be dangerous too, but mainly it's the brain. So in the meat industry, if you feed dead cows to other cows, especially the meats that you can't sell at the supermarket, that tends to be the high-risk meat, and then you're spreading it to all the other cows. Then this other cow got it, and then they're slaughtered, and their brains are fed to other cows, and then those cows get it, and then they're slaughtered, and their brains are fed to other cows, and that's how it was passed. Like, you can see how the way that mad cow disease spread is an indication of a problem in the way we raise and feed our meat, because cows, that's not an appropriate diet for a cow, right? So that's, and a lot of diseases that spread to the human population are what we call zoonoses, or diseases that came from other animals. The current COVID-19 epidemic is an example, but also swine flu, bird flu, West Nile virus. These all come from other animals, and most of the time they come from factory farms. And it has to do, the conditions in which we raise our animals and slaughter our meats create a very, very high risk scenario for pathogens to evolve and move from the animal population to the human population. And prions are another example of that. So usual sterilization members do reduce the numbers of prions and the activity of prions, so that helps a lot, but it sometimes does not completely inactivate or not get rid of every last one, right? So that's the problem, is you really want to get rid of every last one. So So how does contact with another prion, this is not, this is not a virus. It doesn't infect cells in the same way. So how does contact with another prion, disease-causing prion, create new prions? Well, it's a conversion process. So here's a normal prion protein in blue. Here is a disease-causing prion in red. And so the disease-causing prion, if it comes in contact with a normal prion, it does something to it. It grabs it and it changes it. So it passes on its misfold. So it's an enzyme. It's acting as an enzyme. It's catalyzing a reaction. It's when these two come in contact, the disease-causing prion will attach to the normal prion protein and change it, misfold it into another disease-causing prion. Now you've got two disease-causing prions, which each go off and convert more, and then you got four, so you still have that exponential growth pattern. One converts one into two. These two each convert another one into four. Those four are going to each go convert another one. Then you'll have 8. Then you'll have 16, so on and so forth. And with bacteria, you have a death rate, but you don't have that with prions. Okay, because yes, eventually they may, everything degrades over time, but you don't have a death rate the way you would with a living thing. And we've already talked about mad cow disease, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. Just we haven't really talked about the symptoms of it. So because it's in nervous tissue, it causes these prions cause deterioration of the brain and spinal cord. Let's see, we've talked about how it's passed. And so we have a new variant in humans. Viable above 600 degrees Celsius, which is 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is super weird, right? Because these are proteins you'd think they denature. And it's not that they don't, because many of them do, but for some reason they're pretty durable, and so there's still some left over. It could be that some of this has to do with the fact that when you're burning meat, the whole thing doesn't get equally hot, but there is something especially durable about them, and the reason for that is not really clear. So the symptoms it causes is basically muscle weakness, because the nervous system is off. And I want to go back to this real quick and say, so I like to think of prions as zombies in terms of how they replicate. Because, when you're thinking about other pathogens, they replicate much like we do, right? They kind of like have quote unquote babies. Even viruses sort of seem to have babies in which they use their genetic material to make copies of themselves from scratch, right? They make a virus out of smaller building blocks. So it's almost like a virus out of nothing. Well, we know it's not a virus out of nothing, but it uses its genetic instructions as a recipe or a blueprint to take the building blocks that are floating around and build new viruses. But that's not true with prions. Prions are not building new prions from scratch. They're converting normal proteins to prions. So it's sort of like zombies don't have zombie babies. They convert normal people to zombies by biting them, right? So that's how, I guess vampires are the same way, right? So you can think of them that way, like the sort of like the undead in that way. They're not having baby monsters. They're converting normal people to monsters. They're converting normal prion proteins to prions.